Welcome, everyone. If you could please take your seats so that we can start. Wow, that was effective. Thank you so much for coming today, and I hope that we have a fruitful discussion. When I was asked to be a part of this, I was really excited. My name is Amir Ashur, and I'm the founder and the executive director of IraqQueer, which is Iraq's first and only LGBT plus organization. And then I looked through the bios, and I saw how incredible the panelists are and the work that they're doing, and talked to them just briefly before we came here. And we all agreed on one thing, and that's we're not the future generation, we're today's generation. We're not the future leaders, we are leading today. So to have this opportunity is really important for us to showcase what the young people around the world are doing and are capable of doing. We're going to kick the day off with having remarks from the ambassador of Costa Rica, Mr. Juan Carlos Mendez Garcia. So if you could please welcome him to this podium.
Thank you, Mr. Ashu, and thank you for leading today. And thank you for all the people that are leading today. Good evening, everybody. I feel really honored to welcome all of you tonight to this event on behalf of the LGBT core group. I always have trouble because I think of the I that is, but we'll deal with that later. The LGBT core group is a cross-regional and multi-stakeholder group that includes 22 countries, the European Union, the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights, and civil society. We are thrilled to have so many young people accompanying us tonight and to host such a distinguished and diverse panel. This is the first time that we, as a group, organize an event to celebrate the May 17th commemoration. And as many of you know, May 17th is commemorated around the world as the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia, marking the day when the World Health Organization decided in 1990 to remove homosexuality from the international classification of diseases. It is good to know that we, as individuals and as society, have advanced in this issue. Today, more than 130 countries around the world celebrate May 17th. We join the commemoration, though, as a day of global celebration of sexual and gender diversities. We take advantage of this day also to draw the attention of the media, of policy and decision makers, of civil society, of our families, of our friends, of the fact that all of us in our diversity are entitled to all our rights and fundamental freedoms. We also need to make the world aware of the alarming situations of human rights violations faced by lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people, and all of those who experience discrimination because of their sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression based on their sex characteristics, violations that go beyond their physical integrity to deeper and more complex issues such as being forced to deny their own identities, their own selves. It is a fact that LGBTI youth are exposed to particular risk and abuse, violence and discrimination at school, at home, and in their own communities. And this is the main reason we are gathered here tonight, to share some experiences of young people of different parts of the world, to raise awareness on the many challenges LGBTI youth face in their different contexts, and to amplify their voices and celebrate the resilience, promise, and diversity of young LGBTI people around the world that are leading. As stated at the beginning, as the representative of Costa Rica, I am very proud of being able to take part of this event. Costa Rica is one of the last countries, along with Spain, that joined the LGBT core group here in the UN, New York. And I'm personally very pleased that we have joined this initiative, as it signals a firm commitment towards a segment of the population that until today has not been protected as it should have been. As a country that prides itself on being respectful of the human rights of all, we have yet numerous steps in this regard towards the LGBTI community. But we, as a government and as a society, are committed to do better and to take actions to eradicate discrimination and exclusion based on sexual orientation and gender identity. The government extended, for example, an advisory opinion to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights to receive criteria on whether some rights related to sexual orientation and gender identity are protected under the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights, and whether the international norms of the country are in accordance to the Convention. The first issue is related to the rights of persons to modify their names according to their sexual identity and to make this process easy and accessible. The second relates to the patrimonial rights derived from same-sex unions so that legal resources can be enacted in this sense to protect them. We recognize international human rights law as an important tool which, besides the people directly affected, governments should also use to promote human rights at large. So we are trying to enact changes through legislation. We know social norms and stereotypes are more difficult to change, but we are committed to make it happen, to provide protection and to respect everybody's rights and fundamental freedoms. And we are convinced that, as a community, we can support each other and advance towards more inclusive and respectful societies. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and thank you for allowing us to make these introductory remarks. Have a good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Our next speaker is going to be the representative of France, the permanent representative and the ambassador, Mr. François Delattre.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Bonjour, bonjour à tous. Mes chers amis, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's a great pleasure and a true honor for my team and for me to be here with you tonight on this very special occasion as we are gathering to celebrate International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. There is one thing I want to tell you right away, 3 days after the French elections. You can count, my friends, you can count on President Macron and the new French government more than ever to protect and promote the rights of LGBTI people. Thank you. Let me continue in French, just kidding. All over the world, our embassies open their doors to NGOs and LGBTI rights activists. For Idaho, the French authorities called on the French diplomatic and consular network to organize countless events. In some places, that is difficult, but we need to spark discussions, provide a space for change. We encourage all states to join the Equal Rights Coalition created last year in Montevideo by the Netherlands and Uruguay to boost our international efforts. And this is very important. In August 2018, France will host the 10th edition of the Gay Games, which will welcome nearly 15,000 participants from all over the world. So please come to Paris. Everyone over the age of 18 is eligible to participate. Like today, this sporting event is a great opportunity, a unique opportunity to send a positive, constructive message to young people. You know, after he met yesterday in Paris with Secretary General Antonio Guterres, French President Macron said that he will be on his side to protect human rights. It will be on your side too, as I said. The rights of all persons, including, of course, LGBTI, will also remain a top priority for my country's foreign policy, for me as an ambassador here in New York, and also in Geneva with the Human Rights Council, which is a key player in this fight. Mes chers amis, we've come, if you think about it, we've come a long way at the UN since the creation of the LGBT core group, founded by the Netherlands and France. I'm not sure that's the right order. I'm kidding too. And since the General Assembly declaration. Thanks to the resolutions adopted in Geneva since 2011, the issues related to discrimination and attacks against LGBTI people are no longer taboo at the UN. They are on the table. We are all concerned and all mobilized. The UN indeed has a key role to play in promoting good practices, in helping states reform their laws, and in promoting dialogue. This is how the important mandate of the independent expert was conceived by the Human Rights Council. We welcome his first report entitled Diversity in Humanity, Humanity in Diversity. Let us pause just for a second and think about what this title means. It means that each individual, as a human being, is entitled to have his or her rights respected, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. It is the basic condition for living together with our many differences under the protective shelter of international universal human rights law. It is not a matter of creating new rights or protecting a specific community, let alone imposing a model of society, but our common goal should be to ensure that no one is left behind according to the principle behind the SDGs. When supporting human rights for LGBTI, France supports the universality of human rights, which is frankly part of our DNA. States also have a responsibility to comply with international human rights law in order to end all forms of discrimination. Homosexuality is considered a crime in more than 70 countries, which seems unbelievable. In some cases, it is punishable by death. Let's make it a goal for our common future. Sexual orientation and gender identity should not be criminalized at all. Actually, states must ensure that crimes and violations against LGBTI people are investigated and those responsible brought to justice. On April the 12th, the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, along with his German, British, Dutch, and Swedish partners, called on the Russian Federation to condemn the actions of the Chechen authorities and to investigate serious violations of LGBT people's rights. Let's not turn a blind eye. Before I finish, I would like to offer 3 warm messages of thanks. One to the High Commissioner for Human Rights for his forceful statement yesterday. He will say a few words shortly. Thank you too to his office, the OHCHR, for its concrete efforts with all the relevant stakeholders, including civil society and the private sector throughout the world. I invite you to feature its free and equal campaign on your social networks everywhere. I'd also like to praise the inspiring commitment of human rights defenders, such as those attending today, and local and international NGOs. Thanks to all of you, some countries have decriminalized homosexuality and others have adopted laws extending new protections. This is immensely important. This is not the end of the road, but we must continue and we must push and exert maximum pressure on those who need to do better. I would also like to pay tribute to the courage of those who are not here, those who are fighting in the shadows, and there are many. And finally, my special thoughts go out to young LGBT kids growing up in hostile environments, and here again there are many around the world. They may be watching us today through our webcast on UN TV. I want to tell them that they are not alone and that Their fight is our fight. Let's give them hope so that they may believe in a better future to live free and equal. Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. We will now have a short message from Zaid Ra'ad Al Hussein, who is the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Friends, my deep appreciation to the LGBT core group for your commitment to raising awareness of this issue at the United Nations and for organizing this event. Our future depends on how we protect, support, and empower young people to develop their full potential. But that is not what many young lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and intersex people experience. Too many LGBTI youth are rejected and abused by their families and communities. Many end up homeless, living on the streets. Others are subjected to harmful so-called therapies to mistakenly try to change their orientation or identity. Between half and two-thirds of lesbian, gay, bi, and trans youth experience bullying in childhood, leading 1 in 3 to skip or drop out of school. Trans youth are denied recognition of their gender identity. Young intersex people may be subjected to medically unnecessary, irreversible surgeries and treatments without their consent, leading to severe physical and psychological pain. Young people also suffer from laws that criminalize LGBT people and restrict access to information. Although the proponents of such laws claim to protect young people, the result is the opposite: exposure to greater violence, despair. Suicidal thoughts are almost 10 times more likely among young trans people and up to 4 times more likely for gay and lesbian youth. States must do a better job at protecting these young people from abuse and discrimination. We at the United Nations are here to help. We must listen to young LGBT people and amplify their claims for their fundamental rights. We must stand with them in solidarity and support. Many countries are already taking action, drawing up anti-discrimination legislation, reforming school programs, training teachers, prohibiting harmful medical practices, recognizing trans youth, and raising public awareness. We must learn from these initiatives and inspire more, working together for a future in which lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and intersex youth everywhere stand free and equal in dignity and in rights, gracing us with their talents and their energy. Thank you.
Now, can I ask everyone to stand up? And let's face the balcony. Everyone hold hands. We're going to take a family photo. Okay. We will now watch a documentary which is called Out and About. And that will also be one of the contexts that we will use for the following panel. I just want to highlight how important this is to have activists who are young, who are coming from their own countries to share their stories with us and the realities and the different situations that are happening in their countries. And we don't have that opportunity a lot, especially with younger people. To introduce the panelists, I'll start with Jason Goodman, who is a young LGBT activist from Pennsylvania, and he is the founding director of the PA Youth Congress. To his left is Tiger Shigatake. Is that accurate? Yeah. Yes. He's a 19-year-old student from Sophia University in Tokyo. He's a filmmaker, a singer, an actor, and he speaks 4 languages, including French and German. So give him the opportunity to brag about that a bit. So French and German-speaking people, please go approach him and speak that language to him. And then to Jason's right, we have Mickey Wali, who is a trans feminist human rights defender from Fiji and works in the Pacific region. And then our last panelist is Paige Burton, who is an award-winning activist and the youth representative of Australia at the UN. Let's start with a warm round of applause and thanking them for coming. If you could each take a couple of minutes and introduce yourselves and the work that you guys do. Do you want to start, Tiger?
My name is Tiger Shigetake. Okay, nice. So my name is Tiger Shigetake. I come from Tokyo, Japan. Okay, Japan? It's on? Okay. And in Japan, there's a saying, deru kui wa uchikomareru. That means a nail that sticks out gets hammered down. And I was that nail that sticks out. From the ages of 3 to 8, I went to a Japanese school. I was severely bullied. In Japan, suicide rates and bullying is a major issue, and the statistics are very high. Unfortunately, I was one of the statistics. I was harassed by not only the students, but also the teachers. Scars and cuts on my arm heal, but scars on my heart do not heal. And I really had... No, is the microphone on? Oh, it's on, okay. And I had a single mother, so I had no one to run to. And I gave up all hope, and I was found by the Human Rights Watch to share my experiences in Berlin, in Tokyo, and we are working on fixing the educating system for children and youth, so that I don't want people to go through what I've been through, especially the younger generation. So that's what I'm doing, and this is why I'm here. So thank you so much for allowing me to be here all the way from Tokyo. I'm really honored. Thank you.
Hello? Hello? Button? Here we go. Good evening. Working? Great. My name is Jason Landau Goodman. I am from Pennsylvania. I'm the executive director of the Pennsylvania Youth Congress, which is our state's first and only statewide LGBT youth organization and the first LGBT youth-led LGBT advocacy organization in the United States, working at the state level. I first just want to say how much of an honor it is to be with you tonight as you work amazingly around the world on these issues, but also recognize that this work is happening locally. And so for us to share what's going on the ground is really wonderful. So thank you. I'm a fifth-generation Pennsylvanian, and I really am appreciative of all of the support systems that I had for my community growing up outside of Philadelphia. And through going to a Quaker school and coming out as gay and queer in high school, I had a tremendous amount of support. When I started at the University of Pennsylvania, I had incredible resources to start to think about how we could advance the organizing efforts for LGBT people. In Pennsylvania, we do not have a statewide law preventing discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. And so when I found out about that, I was 19 and was very frustrated by the circumstances that were in not only my state but around our country. And so I helped organize, without really any tools or foundation to do so, a local campaign in my township of Lower Merion, and we got the ordinance passed, a local law, unanimously in 2010. So from there, I started to look to how we could grow LGBT youth working together across our state in a youth-led way. So young people leading every part of the movement, looking to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, from the United States and the Civil Rights Movement as a model. And we were able to form this incredible independent youth-led organization that works from Harrisburg in our state capital and in rural communities across our state, on trans student rights, on LGBT student issues, working on poverty, homelessness, healthcare access, and actually having a voice in state government and local government. So that's a little bit about the work we do. And again, thank you for having us all here today.
Bulivinaka, Pacific greetings, and it's good to be here. First of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize and acknowledge the UN core group that has, done tremendous efforts in putting this together. Ensuring that there is an actual core group at the diplomatic, political level who is able to be in solidarity with the entire movement across both the global north and south. I would also like to recognize Outright International, the leading executive director, and everyone else that has worked across the margins all over the world, and including every other activist present and those that have gone before us, and the many other LGBT people that are coming as well. There's going to be plenty of us, and we're not going to disappear from this world. We're here to stay, and staying in this fight means a lot for us, and to be part of this world. Now, part of the story, as we were asked by Mira before coming here, was to talk a bit about ourselves. So I'd like to say that I'm not going to talk to you about myself, because I don't believe in sharing personal stories in any kind of spaces, because personal safe spaces is something we define in our own spaces, and sometimes it's important that we also have some form of understanding on what that is. And I can tell you what it is later on when we have the informal discussion. But really, some of the trans realities that we see now experienced as Pacific trans women and also trans men, both trans feminine and masculine, that live in small island Pacific states, particularly from the Pacific. We're seeing the growing disconnection of how young trans women are facing multiple intersecting forms of discrimination and violence. And this is violence in so many ways. There's a lot of violence that are taking place, and some of the many violence that are not talked about, like intimate partner violence. That's one of the largest violence that we're seeing in the Pacific. And as I speak right now, I know for sure that there's a research that is going to be happening for the first time ever in the Pacific on transgender-based violence, thanks to the partnership for the European Union and also by UN Women and the many other stakeholders. And also to say that, while the discussion is very interesting around human rights, it is fundamental that human rights is a constant conversation we don't just talk about, but we live the principles and values of ensuring that human rights is something that we should continue talking about. And it is not something that should disappear even at the multilateral intergovernmental spaces, something that should always be everyone and anyone's priority in a conversation to open. But also, lastly, to say, as someone that comes from a vulnerable region, who's also facing issues of ecological injustice around environment, not just the humanitarian crisis, but also issues of disaster risk reduction and climate change, as well as the ocean, since the Oceans Conference is coming up. I know for sure that there are many of my trans sisters that, might not be able to find home in the Pacific because their islands might not be around by 2030, at the time when the SDG process will be due. So that is something that we must take into consideration. And maybe lastly, to also say that trade liberalization is also an important discussion which affects the bodies of transgender women who are still political subjects, and really our bodies are not political battlegrounds.
Hi, thank you. It's a great honor to be here as well. I want to as well acknowledge the people, the LGBTI people who came here before us, those who have been arrested, locked up, beaten, denied health care, publicly outed, and imprisoned falsely and incorrectly all over the world. I want to acknowledge the sick, the closeted, and the isolated, the scared, those of you living around the world, those of you who should still be with us as well. My background is a little bit different to everyone else's. I grew up from age 10 in a same-sex parented household and had a different experience of the LGBTI community as well. I was really lucky to be welcomed into that community as a young person and really found my home and am quite comfortable talking about the community. It was a great place to kind of grow up. So I'm not going to talk a lot more about me. I think we should talk about the rest of the discussion.
Do you want to tell us more about your work?
Sorry?
Do you want to tell us more about your work?
Sure. I'm the Australian Youth Representative to the United Nations, and this, thank you. And this year, my mission is to try and paint young people in a complicated and complex way. What would it mean if governments understood young people as being as complex as they are? What if we saw their opinions were a product of their values and their life experiences? So I'm asking them to share their stories to try and paint a more complex picture of young people across Australia.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, when I was asked to moderate this panel, everyone wished me luck, and I think it's obvious that we have luck, so thank you so much for coming. I want to acknowledge something, that even though everyone is coming from such different backgrounds, we all here have certain privileges. Some have more than others, but everyone here has certain privileges. And the problem is not to have privileges. The problem is that we might not use those privileges to help others who don't have access to the same resources. And to build on that, what kind of formal or informal support networks are there in your local communities to LGBT plus individuals who are youth and growing up, maybe not necessarily in welcoming environments, and maybe it is the family or the environment?
So in the United States, we have a very strong LGBTQ student organization movement. They're often called GSAs, or Gender and Sexuality Alliances. We are aware of at least 350 LGBT student groups in Pennsylvania. We also have about a dozen LGBT youth support groups that meet weekly in all parts of our state. And those are really important safe spaces so that we can provide healing spaces, community spacings for people to understand who they are and how they have possibility models going forward. I think in terms of some of the issues that Mickey brought up, this work is intersectional. We want to help support everyone for all of the complex identities that they have. And we know in our society in the United States and certainly around the world that this work must be intersectional. So when we're talking about LGBT rights, poverty is an LGBT issue, and healthcare access is an LGBT issue. And those who are most marginalized and disenfranchised must be at the center. So when we have our community spaces, we have, in Pennsylvania, regular state gatherings and our annual state conference. And last year we focused on violence against LGBT Pennsylvanians, but it was a focus on trans women of color. For trans women of color in the United States are far disproportionately impacted by violence and homicide. So we had panels of trans women who were out there being possibility models and providing these spaces about how we work on these issues. And I think that's very important as we go forward, and millennials are very strong about this intersectional work to make sure those who are most impacted by the issues are not only leading, but they have the microphone.
Yeah, I think we often think about communities as a place where people can go to feel less alone. But I think that the best communities and really good communities make us feel supported and celebrated and powerful. And there are so many communities that I'm very lucky to come from Australia, where there are so many parts of the LGBTI community that do make people feel celebrated and proud and supported. And they can be small communities at university, they can be larger communities as a whole movement. But then again, like if we look at what we just saw in the documentary, there's smaller, more informal kind of communities like family, neighbours, and people we meet. And it's really important to acknowledge those communities as well, because a community doesn't have to be big and loud to be really powerful and meaningful to LGBTI people across the world.
Absolutely.
So the organization I forgot to mention in the introduction I'm part of is House of Chameleon, and we're a trans-led feminist movement in the Pacific and across the global economic south. Now, as House of Chameleon and under the leadership of our creative director, Ms. Sulikwanga, and the many others that are probably, live on webcasts right now, to just also recognize them and the work that they've put forth across the region. But in also saying that as an organization, as a social movement that is under-resourced, that works across the margins and the intersections in ensuring that the priorities and the voices of young trans women and trans women in all diversities are actually heard, including trans women that live with disability, trans women that also live with HIV as well. Some of the support networks that we talk about, I think it's very important to also understand what the definition of support is when we talk about support for the broader LGBT community. And they also have different brief definitions in different contexts, in different cultures. So the second thing we also must talk about, and I think it's important to say this, that as a trans-led feminist movement, we always have to provide a trans-feminist analysis in terms of law reform as well as policy when we're talking about human rights issues, even if it is about mental health, and even if it is about issues that are very much current right now. Those are some of the things that we take into consideration. We use our national mechanism through the constitution of our country under Section 26 of the Bill of Rights that has a clear mention in the Fijian document that has under the provision, Section 26, it talks about sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. So it has the whole soggy thing in it. But then it also must be unpacked within the national system and process, and it must be mainstreamed as well. And so those are some of the support that we provide at the national and local level, and even across the region. But in terms of smaller support services within the different communities, we believe in collaboration and partnership. It's something that we must do at these difficult and interesting times, and it's what we recognize in terms of moving forward as far as the politics is concerned, in recognizing that too.
In Japan, we do not really have a huge gay associations or gay club circles, although we do have a very, very strong HIV/AIDS support team, which is very associated with the LGBTI community. And also, over the last 10 years, in the universities, the gay GSA and such, the numbers are very much increasing. Although we do have many things like that, but we do not have any places where young children such as the age of 3 to 8, can go, flee, and talk to. So that's something definitely Japan needs to work on, I guess. But it is not non-existent. We do have GSAs to some extent, and the numbers are increasing.
Thank you. All of you touched base on the support system, but from what I understood, it's mainly from the civil society. Is there any kind of direct or indirect support from your local or country governments? Paige, do you want to start?
Sure, there are a range of different supports, whether that be for funding for mental health services that target and support LGBTI young people, largely supporting civil society to do the good work and listening to the community and going and doing that. Obviously, there's a long way to go with lots of different issues, but there is support for young people, and that is building throughout. But largely, civil society are good at listening to the community and taking care of that. And the more support they get, the better they are at that.
Perhaps at the national level, as I've mentioned, as an organization that works around law reform and policy, that's slowly, something that we find that's an interesting agenda to always take on. One of the things that we do is we're in partnership, or most of the time in conversations with Capital. And that means that our national NHRIs, as the Fiji National Human Rights and Anti-Discrimination Commission, there's some partnership there. It also ensures that, some of the outcomes and the resolutions that come out from the UPR process must be prioritized and must be taken into consideration without delay. And so what does it also look like at national level? It's just simple. We have open and frank discussions. And for us, it's not so much about coming to the table and arguing. For us, it's basically about strengthening our relationship where it matters. And I think it's not just a political thing. I think it's something that we must continuously recognize, that regardless of the kind of partnerships which then builds relationship, then we won't be able to, work together in a community that can be also hostile.
Historically, we have seen some incredible movements from the United States government in these areas, in visibility and in action through many agencies. What we're seeing right now is a lot of state and local action through our governments taking place. We work closely with our State Department of Education. I sit on the governor's LGBT work group in Pennsylvania, and so we have a voice directly in our state's administration, which is really wonderful. Although we're working to establish an official office of LGBT affairs in our state government, as every state should have. But particularly at the local level, we have in Philadelphia an Office of LGBT Affairs, and other cities are looking toward developing those spaces where you have a direct liaison and a way to address issues quickly and a way to build a community through the government support.
Last year in Japan, the Human Rights Watch talked to the government, who is in charge of the education system of especially elementary schools throughout Japan, and discussed about throughout experiences of bullied young people, how difficult it is to be gay in that country, although it might not seem like it's difficult because of how gay people are celebrated on media, yet absolutely not celebrated in real life. Gay people on media, not at all how they are like on a local level. Therefore, the government does listen, but I do not think LGBTI is mentioned enough in the government. Yeah.
So if you highlight some of the biggest issues you think you face, both individually as LGBT plus individuals, but also in your works, what would they be? We can start with Miki.
It's an organization that constantly comes to participate at international, at regional, and at national and sub-regional levels. One of the things, and even a personal lived reality that we note too common and often of, is violence. The area of ending violence against women and girls of all diversities, including trans feminine and trans masculine, and including the wider LGBT community. Violence is something that we see that affects the community. We're currently undergoing, as I mentioned earlier, in a partnership we've taken with the European Union and the Fiji Women's Rights Movement in terms of moving the agenda, because there's not a lot of disaggregated data, and I think for us that come from the Pacific, we don't have any data that specifically tells us the amount of trans women that live within the country, and therefore also the Bureau of Stats also needs to be reviewed in certain processes where there needs to be some form of understanding about the kind of data that needs to be on the agenda. However, because violence continues to be, the greatest issue that is not often discussed by many, particularly violence against trans women, let alone the amount of violence that takes place at the homes, in the schools, and even from an economic perspective. I know for a fact that around the issues of sexual, reproductive, and health and rights, young trans women who often access health services are still often discriminated and also, stigmatized. They're told that they can't donate their blood in any blood donation drives because they're just not part of a society where they can, participate in those kind of processes. So these are some of the little things that, needs to be understood. And I think maybe lastly, while we're talking about violence, I think emotional violence is something that's a very strong psychological issue as well in the area of violence, because I think it's constantly growing. And I think we must talk about it and ensure that these discussions move as well.
I think it goes back to what I was saying before. All of the sort of problems, as much as they are, can be, localized violence in homes, or on a more like a national level of recognizing marriage equality and a bunch of other things. But it comes down to that idea of acknowledging the complexity of other people and recognizing that we sort of confer humanness onto each other. And so when we deny, as governments, the suffering of minorities, we do that. But on a more sort of micro level, when I look at someone and I dehumanize them by imagining them as being as less complex as I am, by making them merely a them to some us that includes me, I think that we really miss out on all of their story and all of those things. So I think there are loads of different issues that mean different things to different people. My issues as someone who lives in an inner city in Australia is very different to someone in a remote community, someone with a less supportive family, and those issues are so big. But it comes down to sort of denying the essential humanity that we have with each other and thinking about the way that we need to recognize those rights and the way that those rights differ from me to you to everyone else on this panel as well.
Yes. I would echo what has just been said. I think violence is probably the most important issue that's, a direct interference with so many of young LGBT people's ability to thrive, with that fear either of violence from their own communities or from spaces in which they occupy, like in schools or in their in access to healthcare. Particularly for my work, mostly involved with schools. We have trans students who are suspended for using the bathroom. We have LGBT people who are facing harassment and bullying in their schools to the point where they're dropping out of school. So a lot of these issues are connected, but violence, discrimination, poverty, healthcare access, those are certainly at the top of the list.
One major problem we have in Japan is ignorance. As I mentioned earlier, gay people on media are celebrated, yet not celebrated for the good reasons. They're celebrated for laughing. They're celebrated because they are a clown, obviously. And media, so obviously people watching, children, teachers, parents, anyone who's watching are very brainwashed and thinking, oh, we make fun of gay people in real life. And also teachers educate students in a way that they try to hammer down the nail that sticks out instead of celebrating it. Therefore, sorry, I'm really jet-lagged, blanked out. Sorry. Yeah, and teachers have a very, very vital role in. Teachers are often very, very made fun of, not just in Japan, but I'm sure all over the world. Saying such things like teachers. That's a profession that you choose when one can't really choose a job. But in my book, teachers have a very, very important role in raising children who become adults. If they teach children in a wrong way, they will make bad adults, not just teachers, but parents. So incorporating more understanding, more empathy in the education is very, very vital. And instead of hammering down the nail that sticks out, celebrating in it and teaching children to be able to accept differences, I think that is a very, very vital thing. in our culture to be worked on.
Thank you. We're going to open the floor for some questions, if there are any. Okay, we'll take 2 questions. Aaron?
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Aaron Holtz. I'm with the United Kingdom Mission to the United Nations. Really happy to be a part of the core group putting on this event, and thank you so much for your fantastic interventions and really your courage and work that you're all doing. It's really fantastic to listen to you. I just had a really brief question. We talk here at the United Nations a lot about this 2030 development agenda. I don't know if you've heard about it. I can't go to one meeting without talking about the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. And of course, we all know the tagline is "Leave no one behind," right, for this agenda. Now, LGBT people are not specifically mentioned in this agenda, but when I talk to colleagues and to activists, I tell them you have to see yourself in that agenda. You have to demand from your government that we are part of that, everyone, and you cannot leave us behind. You cannot say that you've achieved these sustainable development goals if then a large significant part of your population are not being, incorporated into that. So I'd wonder, from your own experiences in your own countries, is that message getting out on the 2030 agenda? Is it something that people are talking about? Is it a tool that you can use in your advocacy to demand more from your governments and demand more from the international community? Are we doing our job as the UN in getting that message out? Thanks.
Let's have 2 of each of you guys answer each question. So who wants to take this question?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think it's really important work. Obviously, you've all spent a lot of time doing it. And that message is young people in Australia are very interested and engaged with that, and hopefully moving forward will be as well. I think it's important to kind of know, and obviously everyone in this room knows that, but the movement towards equality isn't a convenient side effect of time. It's a direct result of working together as community to the shared values that we have as an international organization, as individuals, towards a society that is free and equal. And I think that making sure that people feel connected to those goals and those values is how we get to equality. It doesn't just happen over time. There's a lot of work that's been put into them. So hopefully we're able to kind of extend that into schools and get young people talking about that in a really positive way as well.
So let me just say, first of all, kudos and good on you, United Kingdom, for joining the bandwagon. And I think the hope is that you continue to remain in this core group. I think you've asked a very strong question, and I think the agenda on the Sustainable Development Goals. Let me just take you back during the post-2015 development process, that era. I know for a fact that young people of all diversities from both North and South came out in strong numbers, whether it was online. We participated at various spaces, and the opportunities we had through our major groups, through our missions, as well as even directly through the regional mechanisms that existed. And therefore, the call was very strong on inclusiveness. Inclusiveness was, and it so happened that, Goal 16 became something that perhaps could be more about engaging the wider diaspora around the world. And therefore, the goal on inclusiveness needs to also, has already taken into consideration, the diversity that exists within humanity. But at the same time, for organizations that are also passionate about gender issues, we will definitely work across the SDG 5, which is around gender equality. At national level, there is some conversations. The conversations on the indicator process. At the regional level, we know that there's a regional task force on SDG as well as at the national level too. And it also means that, I think the spaces are available. It's just a matter of allowing for civil society's participation, really. And I think because there's an issue of the shrinking spaces of civil society, it is therefore important that the engagement for civil society is open, and that we have some accountable conversations that can also allow for more understanding, as well as for some other additional conversations across the intersections pertaining to the issue of youth and youth in all diversities, regardless if it's LGBT, disability, and even for young women too.
I saw a lot of hands going up, so maybe the best strategy would be to have people approach the panelists individually So I want to first conclude by saying that the only way for this conversation to be meaningful is if we followed it by actual active actions. And that can only happen if we, have activists, youth activists, and other activists from other backgrounds be involved in these international platforms and others. So I come from Iraq. Don't let Iraq tell you what kind of human rights they're protecting, because I can tell you what they're violating. And the only way for people here to know is by having activists who work from the ground, like the panelists we have today and so many others. So the next thing, I want to first thank our panelists for all the insights and the information. And I want to welcome to the podium the Deputy Permanent Representative of Germany, Mr. Jürgen Scholz. Please. Okay. You can go back to the seats.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, dear friends, after listening to so many inspiring speakers, I'm truly honored to wrap up our event on behalf of the 24 members of the LGBTI core group. And in a nutshell, I think one can say today we have sent a very strong message. And that message is that it is unacceptable anywhere for LGBTI people to suffer human rights violations due to their sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or intersex status. This message was particularly strong because it came from young LGBTI people. And today's panelists who have just spoken, they referred to the incredible resilience demonstrated by young LGBTI people in the face of discrimination and human rights violations. They are an inspiration for all of us. But at the same time, they also need the support of the international community to ensure that they are given equal opportunities and a safe environment. Inside the United Nations system, we still have a long way to go in putting LGBTI issues at the top of the agenda. This has become evident, for example, in the Human Rights Council in Geneva, but also here in New York. And this is why the LGBTI core group works closely with civil society to ensure that the voices of LGBTI people are heard in UN processes. That is very important. Germany is proud to have joined the LGBTI core group with Mexico last year, and we are encouraged to see that the core group's membership is steadily growing. I think this is a very, very good sign. This event is an example of the successful cooperation between the core group and civil society. And I would like to conclude with a few words of thanks. First of all, I would like to thank the co-chairs, Argentina and the Netherlands, for all their work in making this event possible. Thank you very, very much. And on behalf of the core group, I would also like to express my gratitude to the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights and the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, which have supported this event so much. Thank you very much. And finally, my thanks goes to our distinguished panelists, who we've just heard a few seconds ago. It goes to the many civil society representatives attending today, and to all of you who have come here to attend this important event and to make this a success. Thank you very much. Dear friends, the first words of the first article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in 1948, spells out a very basic truth. And that very basic truth is that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And the human rights of LGBTI people are therefore not new rights. They are part of the application of existing human rights to everybody. And the LGBTI core group remains firmly committed to realizing this human right for everybody and across the board. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for coming and for listening to our panelists, to our speakers, the different ambassadors. Thank you for all the progressive governments and the organizations. The right-wing groups might be increasing, but so are we. So let's continue the fight. It's now time to leave.